A Gentleman Always Leads is the fourth episode of the first season of Back to You, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode and share some thoughts. I will go through things chronologically. We have one main story, but we also have a subplot involving a character called Troy. I rather liked Troy, but we'll get to him in a moment. It starts off with Chuck in the lobby. He meets some old acquaintances. We realise that they are in town, and then Chuck goes into the elevator and it's quite crowded, so two people walk in who don't see him and they talk about him and they say that he is playing second fiddle to Kelly. And Chuck suddenly becomes worried that his old acquaintances, his old colleagues, are going to think the same thing. So when they're talking about the news in the morning, Chuck basically steals a missing family story from Kelly. Kelly really wanted this. She was going to go at it from the angle of a mother, and Chuck took it for himself. And this is what the bulk of the episode is about. However, we do then meet a new intern. Montana is not happy with her current intern, so she gets a new intern called Troy, and he's played by Bill Macy. And he is much older than the average intern. And I think I'll just sum up the part of the story with Troy first of all. And things are not going very well in Montana's eyes for Troy. But I rather liked Troy. I thought he was really charming and very sweet. And he was a hard worker, by which I mean he seemed willing to do anything and get stuck in. But he definitely had a much more slow approach than Montana would have liked. There's a quote in this from Marsh, actually, that I really loved, because they're thinking of trying to fire Troy because things are just not going well. And they're trying to fire him, and they realise they just can't do it. And Marsh says, and I quote, "You realise you're going to be old someday and you don't want some young punks tossing you on the slag heap." And I love that. I love the fact that it's saying, yes, he is older. No, he may not be able to work as quickly or as efficiently as some young people. He was trying to get coffee out of a fax machine at one point. But everybody is going to be that age at one point. And it's important to treat people who are older with kindness, just because they may not be as quick as younger people. Doesn't mean they don't have value. It doesn't mean they don't have feelings. So I like that. I like the direction it took. I thought it worked very well. And as I said, I really liked the character of Troy. The rest of the episode is, of course, about Chuck and Kelly, and it's a bit of a roller coaster. Because initially Chuck's story is going to be the lead, and then Ryan says they're bumping Kelly's fire story to the lead, so Chuck decides to steal the fire story back from her, and just as he gets it back, the missing people story is suddenly exploding, and this goes back and forth basically throughout the entire episode, and it's never clear which story is going to be the lead, or indeed which story Chuck is going to end up having. And he is about to tell Kelly the truth about why he desperately wanted the lead story, but Kelly already knows. She knows that his old colleagues are around, and I think for a moment, I very briefly thought that she was going to give up the lead story for him, but she doesn't. She keeps it for herself, and honestly, I don't feel bad towards her for that. I think Chuck was the one who was behaving really unacceptably throughout this, so I don't blame Kelly for keeping the story to herself. But then, towards the end, just as they're about to do the broadcast, Kelly does give him the bear story, which is going to be the main story, and I felt like there must be an ulterior motive, but initially it did feel like Kelly was being really sincere. But then we realised that Kelly was actually setting Chuck up because he is interviewing somebody who was involved in the bear story, and he's wheeled out, and when he begins to talk, he has a very high-pitched voice. And I don't understand why Chuck what he did, because he just started questioning this victim's voice and asking him if it was his real voice. And to be fair, I don't believe that that's what Chuck would have done. I don't think Chuck, with as much experience in the field as he does, would actually behave that way. But obviously for the purpose of the episode, it was a way to humiliate him, to show that Kelly was able to give Chuck what he wanted while also getting some amusement out of his embarrassment. So I understand why they did it for the show, but I actually don't believe Chuck would have responded that way. So I don't love it, but I understand why they did it. And it becomes very clear that Kelly knew what she was doing, because during the broadcast she said to Chuck, "I just think Mr. Robbins is a hero as I told him when I spoke to him before the show. So Kelly knew that he had a high-pitched voice, and she knew or suspected that Chuck would kind of fumble in response to this. And then to end the episode, everybody makes fun of Chuck by speaking in a high-pitched voice. It's definitely not a bad episode. I was hoping for a little bit more progress with Chuck and Kelly's daughter. I was hoping we'd maybe take a step further towards Chuck potentially being a father to her, but I'm hoping that that's something that we progress with. On the flip side, I can understand the argument of people saying, I don't want this to just be the only story. I want us to have other aspects of their daily lives. So it's not the end of the world that we haven't made any progress with their daughter at this point, but at the same time I would have liked to have seen it, but hopefully we'll get more of that soon. Either way, I thought this was a really good episode. A Gentleman Always Leads is very well written, the pacing is great, there's a great amount of comedy in there, really great supporting characters, particularly with Troy. I rather liked him. We also have Regan Burns as Mr. Robbins, the bear victim. Definitely not a bad episode. I'm looking forward to the next one.